thank you for joining me once again for the Well-Read Christian Podcast. My name is Mark Stanley, and today we're going to enjoy the third installment of our series on Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. And before we get started, I would like to once again remind you to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, leave a review, access our social media accounts on Facebook and Twitter. You can visit our website at wellreadchristian.com and access our newsletter and check out our blog. The more attention we generate for those big tech companies, the farther our reach goes. And as I'm learning very quickly, I'm talking to myself without that, so that would be very helpful. Thank you. This week on the Well-Read Christian Podcast, we get to look at Prince Andrei Bolkonsky, who is a central character in Tolstoy's War and Peace. We'll talk about his general character arc, as well as a few interesting rabbit trails along the way that I hope you'll find worthwhile. I spent some time introducing Andrei in the introduction episode, so I'm not going to repeat too much of what I said there, although hopefully I will go into more depth. I said in the introduction that my first impression of Prince Andrei was a negative one, since he has a poor outlook on marriage and is self-deceived about his motivations for going to war. Andrei is generally condescending toward people he doesn't respect. He has a high opinion of himself, and he wants to be recognized for his intellect. So, as much as that doesn't make for a really good first impression, I think we can all relate to this vanity of wanting to be recognized and admired by others for our personal strengths. Andrei is a very complex character. He's skeptical by nature and distrusts any religious claims. He does not believe in God or anything supernatural. He's generally more of a realist about the world, I think. And most commentators describe him as cynical, but like I said, I actually find that he's more of a realist. He generally sees things for how they are rather than for how we would hope that they would be. And this is going to come out especially in his conversations with Pierre Bezukhov, which we'll talk about those conversations in a moment. But Andrei is more reserved when sharing his opinions and arguing for them. He's definitely less boisterous and extroverted than Pierre. And Andrei has a completely different set of presuppositions and ideas and really just personality background. He's more sophisticated, well-mannered, well-read, more level-headed. I mean, I won't let you forget that the first thing Pierre did when he came back from his studies abroad in the very beginning of the novel is tie a police officer to a domesticated bear while he was drunk with all of his drunk buddies. And that is never anything that Andrei would even consider doing. Andrei is, he's the kind of guy who he drinks his martini with his pinky out. You can understand, you can get the picture of a very rationalistic person who approaches life in a very measured way, including all of his relationships. He doesn't really have a strong connection to his emotions, and if he does, he doesn't understand them. And if he does, he doesn't express them well. And like I mentioned in the introduction, he has no eye for beauty. He has no interest in taking a walk in the woods or playing with his young child or interacting with his wife in an interesting or meaningful way. Like I said before, he looks down on the simple faith of his wife and his sister. Some of it's warranted. They do have a very simplistic faith, but it's devout and it's pious, and I think that it's admirable, generally, but he does tease them for it often. And the only thing that really motivates Andrei is this notion of being recognized for his cunning and bravery on the battlefield. That's really the only thing that really gets him excited. That's what his mental life is obsessed with, is thinking about how can I show myself to be the equal of Napoleon? How can I show myself to, in one moment of strategic brilliance, reorder some troops and rush into the battlefield and rout back the French and show everybody who I really am on the inside that they don't get to see because I just haven't had the opportunity yet. And like I said, I really think that when you're reading, or at least when I'm reading, I can relate to this. I can relate to wanting to be recognized, for wanting people to look at me and be, wow, that guy is, something. He's really smart. He's really fill in the blank. And I think all of us have our own little fantasy of something happening to us or an opportunity arising where we could really do something that would make everyone go, whoa, I didn't know you had that in you. That's really awesome. And so Andrei is really looking for this in his own life on the battlefield. But as we've also explored a little bit in our introductory episode, this doesn't go so well at the Battle of Austerlitz, which is his first battle. But before we zoom into that battle really close, I want to give a little bit more background on Andrei and the fact that his father is a retired army general. And so he immediately gets an excellent position as an adjutant, which is basically the right-hand man of a general. He delivers all the orders the general gives. He is responsible for making sure the general is informed about the battlefield and what's going on. And basically all the lieutenants, if they can't report to the general, will report to the adjutant, who will then turn around and inform the general. So he kind of acts as the right-hand man, an extension of the general. And Andrei is the adjutant of no less than General Kutuzov, who, even from history, is the supreme leader, so to speak, of the Russian forces. Alexander, the emperor, appointed Kutuzov to lead the entire defense against Napoleon. And so Andrei is really put in the center of the action. And perhaps we'll talk about General Kutuzov more in episode 5, because he's a fascinating character. He does not have high approval rating. Most of the troops and the people and the aristocrats do not like Kutuzov because he's not young. He's a very old guy. He's got a scar across his face like a classic, I don't know, villain in a movie or something. He speaks slowly. He's just kind of an old, crotchety guy. And he has kind of his own ideas about the best way to negotiate and maneuver in a battlefield, because his view is that patience and time are his greatest strengths. Battles are won by morale, not by trenches and fortifications or even ammunitions. And so there's this great scene where Andrei is in on the first battle meeting, like the planning, where there's General Kutuzov, there's Alexander, and there is Emperor Franz II, who is the Austrian emperor, and they are planning for the Battle of Austerlitz. French forces are here, Napoleon is here, and they know they're going to have to do battle probably the next day, if not early this morning. And so they're all in this drawing room trying to plan and saying, oh, well, should we set up a flanking maneuver over here or just attack head on? And should we dig the trenches here or there? Or should we try to bait him? What are we going to do? And as the debates rage on, Kutuzov is falling asleep. And eventually, people are all looking around, like nudging the Russian general of all of the forces, going, dude, we're planning here. Like, do you mind? And he kind of quibs that, well, you know, good sleep is really the best thing that you can have for the night before a battle. You know, good sleep and a good meal. And everyone's just looking around like, you got to be kidding me. This is the general of the Russian forces? This is the guy? And Andrei is sitting there like, oh, you got to be kidding me. He doesn't say anything. But in his head, he's like, I could do General Kutuzov's job better than he's doing it. He wants that job. He wants the position of power so that everyone can look at him as the savior of Russia. That would be his wildest dream. But since he's a mere adjutant, he stays silent and simply prepares for the next day, knowing that any moment could be his opportunity. And he gets an opportunity. The next morning, this is so good. I'm really excited to tell this story. The high commander of the army, Kutuzov, is with his adjutants, including Andrei, obviously, and they're observing the troops march into what is going to be the front lines on top of this hill. And they're expecting the French to come in about an hour or so. And so they're inspecting the troops and chatting amongst themselves and watching them set up cannons and doing all these sorts of things, when suddenly some of the troops start looking around towards the bottom of the hill, and they see the heads of thousands of French troops. And pretty soon the regiment begins to panic. Is that the French? It must be. But so soon? What are we going to do? Finally, one man, as if giving an order, shouts, "That's it for us, lads." And full panic erupts. Bullets begin raining down into the already retreating army. Cannon fire starts obliterating men by the handful. Chaos immediately explodes, and it's every man for himself. As the retreating forces are pushing Andrei and all the adjutants apart, they're trying to communicate and yell at one another. What are we going to do? Where's Kutuzov? What's he doing? He's right there. There he is. And then suddenly Kutuzov's horse gets struck in the heart by a random bullet. So the general falls to the ground, and the adjutants are looking at one another, trying to figure out which one of them is going to go help the general, because they are all stuck and isolated and trying to get around and maneuver around the troops on their horses. And Andrei feels this sense of defeat already. He is so angry at how this battle has started. He had it played over in his head again and again and again what it was going to look like. And this is not how he had expected it to go down. And so, with a murmur in French, he gets off his horse and rushes over to Kutuzov and asks if he's hurt. And Kutuzov says the injury is there and gestures to the army that's all running away. And there's a man with a staff of standard, which is a large banner that you see in paintings and films and stuff, like the flag on it. And as the guy's running away, he's shot in the spine and collapses right in front of Andrei. And this is where he sees his moment. He's got Kutuzov right in front of him on his hands and knees, and he's got some blood on his mouth that he's trying to wipe up, and all the troops are retreating, and he feels this intense emotion of pity and frustration, and he just wants to weep right then and there. But as soon as he sees that dude with a staff of standard fall, he takes this moment of pride and inspiration, and he ignores what Kutuzov begins to say, and he picks up the heavy banner, and he charges into battle with a shrill and childish cry of, "Charge!" And with an unwavering confidence that the entire battalion would turn around and run after him. And sure enough, he was right. And with the cry of, "Hurrah!" one soldier at a time, the Russians stop, turn around, look at what's happening, pick up their rifles, and continue to charge down the hill. Andrei doesn't get to enjoy this victory for long, though, because as the forces actually clash and begin fighting, Andrei is struck in the back of the head with a club, and he passes out. He wakes up a couple hours later to find hundreds of Frenchmen storming over him and the bodies of the comrades that he has brought into war. And he has no idea whether Kutuzov was captured, but he is absolutely certain that the Russians have been handily defeated. And as he's laying on this hill, bleeding out, with the utter defeat of Russia in battle, he realizes that everything that he's been fighting for and aspiring to is absolutely worthless. Here he is, about to die, and all he has ever really cared about is becoming the next Napoleon, is being the Russian answer to the Bonaparte threat. And now, like I said in the introduction, he is there, bleeding out, and he sees the sky, tranquil, transcendent, and it has an impact on Andrei that is deep, and it will follow him throughout his entire life. And I'll read a quote. "Then, too, everything seemed so useless and insignificant compared with that stern and majestic way of thinking called upon him by weakness from loss of blood, suffering, and the expectation of imminent death." Looking into Napoleon's eyes, Prince Andrei thought about the insignificance of grandeur, about the insignificance of life, the meaning of which no one could understand, and about the still greater insignificance of death, the meaning of which no one among the living could understand or explain. In the medical camps, Andrei is given a few more opportunities to talk to Napoleon, although he is not interested anymore. He just wants to be left alone. The French think he's going to die soon, and so they let him be transported into Russia. They were in Austria, and so they don't keep him as a prisoner of war or anything like that. And he actually does recover, and he ends up just wanting to live alone as a hermit. His view of glory has been shattered. He has no idea what he wants to do with his life, and he's just bitter and alone and resentful and convinced of nothing but the fact that life can bring pain and misery. So Andrei wants to be as far from war as he can, and he moves into this recluse house that's undecorated in an uninteresting city, because while he was gone, his wife has died in childbirth. Not that he really cared, to be honest, but, that just means one less thing he has to do. So he lives alone and away. And During this time, Prince Andrei realizes that maybe his life could be happier if he could only believe. I have another quote for you. Quote, "It would be good," thought Prince Andrei, looking at this icon which his sister had hung on him with such feeling of reverence. "It would be good if everything was as clear and simple as it seems to Princess Marya. How good it would be to know where to look for help in this life, and what to expect after it, there, beyond the grave. How happy and calm I'd be if I could say now, 'Lord, have mercy on me.' But to whom shall I say it? Either it is undefinable and unfathomable, which I cannot access or address, but that which I cannot express in words. It is all or nothing," he said to himself. "Or is it that God, whom Princess Marya has sown in here, is in the omelet? Nothing is certain, except the insignificance of everything I can comprehend, and the grandeur of something incomprehensible, but most important." End quote. So that's going to be the first experience with the transcendent that I'm going to call for the purposes of this episode. Act 1, Prince Andrei has a near-death experience, and he realizes that life is meaningless and that there's nothing valuable in the admiration from other people. And so it leaves him feeling like there's got to be something out there that's important, but it's incomprehensible. It's too close to touch. I can't get to it. I can't see it. I can't hear it. I can't feel it. But it's there, and he has no idea how to access it. Meanwhile, Pierre Bezukhov has joined the Masonry and is trying to liberalize his estates, and he believes that he's freeing some of the peasants on his land, and he's very optimistic about the goodness and the happiness that can be attained in life, even despite the separation from his wife and the war and so on. He's much more maybe naive about the positive influence of loving thy neighbor and finding meaning and helping humanity, while Andrei is just like, yeah, forget that. I'm just going to live alone. I'm going to do my own thing, and one of these days I'll keel over. But after years have gone by, Pierre decides to visit Andrei, and he discovers that he's living in this small, undecorated estate in an obscure village. And this is such a huge contrast with the lavishness of Andrei's living in Petersburg that he's very surprised. And when he meets Andrei, he finds that even his face has aged, and his eyes are different, way beyond their years. And when he sees Andrei, he can tell that he's trying to be happy, but he just isn't. I want to read another quote, because this is signature Tolstoy. I love this. Listen to this. Quote, "How unexpected. I'm very glad," said Prince Andrei, regarding the visit. Pierre had said nothing. He looked at his friend in astonishment and could not take his eyes off of him. He was struck by the changes that had taken place in Prince Andrei. His words were affectionate. There was a smile in Prince Andrei's lips and face, but his gaze was distinguished, dead, and despite his obvious desire, Prince Andrei could not give it a joyful and merry luster. It was not that his friend had grown thinner, paler, or more mature. It was this gaze and the wrinkle on his forehead, expressive of a long concentration on some one thing, which struck and alienated Pierre until you got used to them. End quote. And so the conversation that they have once they're visiting is much like a conversation between two friends who have not seen each other in years. They gloss over things they should have spent hours talking about. Both of them want to talk about deep things, but they feel it's like a duty to catch up about, well, what are your plans? And, oh, very interesting, very good. And how's the family? And that kind of thing. And so they don't get to share deeper interaction until Pierre finally decides, you know what? No, I want to tell him about my masonry and my optimism and the improvements that I've made in the lives of my peasants. And Andrei was listening, but with not only no interest, but with some shame. He felt awkward and even oppressed by his friend's company, and it was clear that they had completely opposite developments in the past few years. And after a few hours, they finally get to a place where they can talk freely, and Andrei pretty much just tells him, look, I'm done living for other people. I tried to do that. I tried to be an upstanding soldier in the army, But look where that got me. I'm wounded, I'm almost crippled, and now I just try to live alone and do whatever makes me happy. And there are only two evils, he says: remorse, so regret, and illness. So basically, just look, try not to get sick and don't do anything you regret. And anything else is good for you. And I actually think that this is the whole worldview of many people. Just do what you want, try not to have any regrets, and try not to suffer major pain. Everyone has their own subjective morality. No one can tell anyone else what to do. The world isn't going to change. And all you can do is just try to live a reserved life and mind your own business, stay in your own lane, leave others alone, stay quiet, keep your head down, do your own thing. But Pierre would say the exact opposite. He would say before he lived for himself. He drank and he partied and he married out of lust, but now he tries to live for others. He gives away huge portions of his income. He's trying to liberalize his estates and free his peasants, give them wages, improve their living conditions. And Andrei is like, look, you're not really doing anybody any favors. Sure, they have a little bit less pain, but in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't mean much. But deep down, Andrei can't help but feel like maybe Pierre is right, and he looks at the sky in the same way that he saw it back at Austerlitz. But as soon as he looks down, that moment is gone, and his intellect cannot allow him to see things as Pierre does. And Pierre is afraid of Andrei's intellect, and so the more he shares, the more he's like, oh, you're gonna take this apart and manipulate it and make it sound stupid, and so now I don't really want to tell you anymore. There's an interesting interaction when Princess Maria, Andrei's sister, comes back. And Maria represents the Russian Catholic, pious, institutionalized Christianity, while Pierre is the Masonry. It's kind of the structuralist Christianity. And you have Andrei, the atheist. And so there's a moment where Andrei is teasing Maria, and Pierre doesn't know whether to kind of laugh with Andrei, like, ha ha ha, or like jump into the defense of Princess Maria. And so they all kind of have this awkward moment of silence where they're all looking around, and Andrei kind of realizes that he put everybody in an awkward spot, and he just leaves the room. After the visit, everybody goes to their respective homes. A few years pass. Andrei decides to give life another shot. He had to get a job working as a clerk at a government office. He's on a safety committee for something or other. And he's just trying to kind of do his own basic things, trying to recover. And he goes to this one party where he meets Natasha Rostov, who is the sister of Nikolai, if you remember the introduction episode. And he dances with her, and he feels a little something, and he's like, wow, this is actually a really nice girl. And he allows himself to fall in love. And here is where I'm going to introduce Act 2, so to speak, of Andrei's story arc, because as he's falling in love, I'm skipping right along here, months into their relationship now, Natasha sings a song at Prince Andrei's request. And I want to read you another quote, because this is powerful. Here we see music as the gateway to that transcendent experience. Quote, after dinner, Natasha, at Prince Andrei's request, went to the clavichord and began to sing. Prince Andrei stood by the window, talking with the ladies, and listened to her. In the middle of a phrase, Prince Andrei fell silent and suddenly felt choked with tears, which he did not know was possible for him. He looked at the singing Natasha, and something new and happy occurred in his soul. He was happy, but at the same time he felt sad. He had decidedly nothing to weep about, but he was ready to weep. About what? His former love, Lise, his wife? The little princess, his sister? His disappointments? His hopes for the future? Yes and no. The main thing was he wanted to weep in a sudden, vivid awareness of the terrible opposition between something infinitely great and undefinable that was in him and something narrow and fleshly that he himself, and even she, was. This opposition tormented him and gladdened him while she sang. End quote. So this is a great example of music being that gateway between just a normal day and all of a sudden you get raptured into this moment where you think, maybe there really is some beauty in the world. And it's funny, I think that in our sophisticated 21st century American life, sometimes we don't have these moments as often as we'd like. For me, they often occur when I'm spending time with friends or with music. There are very powerful pieces that can give me these similar emotions too, and they make you experience something on a deeper level. And I actually want to talk about this because the question has to be asked, is this a simple biological phenomena? Is this just brain chemistry smashing together and producing a strange effect which we can just brush off as soon as it's gone? Or is this a true experience that actually tells us something about life? C.S. Lewis has this idea in his essay, Thoughts in a Toolshed, or Meditations in a Toolshed, where he talks about the two different ways to view the same event, namely an experience. What is the true experience? Observing someone who's experiencing something, or actually experiencing it yourself? So if a scientist was looking at Andrei, he would say, no, there's nothing supernatural or even interesting going on. It's just brain waves are manipulating in a way based on the music that made you feel a certain sense of nostalgia or something. And so you've got all these complex hormones raging, and there you go. Just like you could take a reductionistic view towards love or falling in love. So what's the true best way to understand an experience like falling in love? Is it to understand all of the background and science that goes behind hormones and affections and attachments and brainwaves? Or is it actually the experience of enjoying all of those things and seeing from the inside that there's really something going on? Lewis argues that you really need both experiences in order to fully understand a physiological and psychological phenomena. You need the facts surrounding the brain chemistry and everything else, but you also must experience the subjective sensations of, say, falling in love. And these two realms of knowledge are necessary, and you really need both of them. Some thinkers want to only use the objective as the means for truth, and there are some who don't really care about the objective, what's going on. They just want the subjective experience. But the truth is that you need both of them. So the question that I have when I read about Andrei's experience with the transcendent, as I'd like to call it, the question is this: does Andrei's experience actually tell us something about life? Or is it just some brain waves going on that make you feel a certain way at certain times and then it's over? Because I would like to argue that a basic experience of life, and therefore a necessary component of it, is experiencing these moments where we realize, you know what? It doesn't really matter what people think of you. It doesn't matter. Or, wow, that is a beautiful song. Or even when I'm reading literature, I'll have these moments where I step back and I go, that is a phenomenal piece of writing. Because it gives you an experience like Andrei just experienced. And the point that I'm trying to make here is this. As Lewis famously lived for, those experiences are worth pursuing. They're valuable. They tell you something about reality. We are not overgrown apes who just want food and shelter and sex. We are human beings. And human beings need beauty. And beauty is not something that the atheist, that Andrei, the reductionist, the simple, just take it as it comes kind of guy, is able to see naturally. It has to smack him in the face. Andrei is the last person to ever look for these kinds of experiences. He doesn't listen to music. Well, let me ask you, do you listen to music looking for these kinds of experiences, or is it just something in the background? Do you spend time with family as if maybe you can actually get a piece of something greater than yourself? Or is it just, okay, I guess here I am? And so I would just like to take this little tiny rabbit trail and finish it out here and just say, if you want to experience life, you need two essential components. You need the objective. You want to know what's going on. You want to be rational. You want to be objective. But you also need the subjective. You need the experiential. You need to be able to listen to a piece of music and feel like you kind of want to weep. You need to be able to read a book and have a similar experience. You need to be able to laugh way too hard at something that's not even that funny for the beauty of it, for the value of it. So Andrei decides that he really does love Natasha and that he wants to pursue a marriage. And so because he has a kind of an overbearing relationship with his father, he asks his father what he thinks. And his father is just a cruel version of Andrei, basically. And so, frankly, Andrei's father doesn't really want him to be happy. And so he says, you know what? You're kind of going a little fast with this girl. I think you need to go see the world, try to mentally recover from your PTSD. And then when you come back, if you still feel this way, then I'll bless the marriage. And so Andrei explains this all to Natasha, who is giddy to have been proposed to, and they agree. And so Andrei goes and spends a year traveling and very rarely writes, and Natasha is left home just giddy in excitement. Well, after an entire year of Andrei being gone, he ends up being late. Pretty soon, it's the 13th month and the 14th month, and everybody's kind of standing around going, okay, any month now, Andrei, you need to come back and marry your betrothed. And Natasha, who is just full of life and always excited to experience the next beautiful moment, meets another man whose name is Anatole, who turns out is already married, but he doesn't really care. He likes Natasha and would like to woo Natasha to elope with him. And so with his cunning and his handsomeness and his humor, he spins Natasha all around in a circle around his finger and is going to elope. Well, there's a family member who is adopted in the Rostov family who feels like she's not quite loved like everyone else, and so she's constantly trying to show the family how much it means to her that she was able to live with them. She's technically a cousin, and there's a really awesome scene in the book where she demonstrates her love to the family in a really powerful way by discovering that Natasha plans on eloping with Anatole and locking Natasha in her room and listening as Natasha berates her, I hate you, and Sonia is able to take it and say, and as she's just weeping as she holds the door closed, saying, I can't let you do this. I'm not going to let you betray the family, to betray Andrei, to betray everyone, but to betray yourself. And of course, rumors start that Natasha was not going to be faithful to Andrei, that Natasha would have escaped with Anatole, and so the damage to her reputation is done. And Tolstoy actually explains why the scene was important to him in an essay. I think it was titled, What is Art? And Tolstoy was arguing that the purpose of art, the reason why he wrote, is to get people inside of the perspectives of someone else. And his argument is that if you truly see someone in themselves, you cannot actually get mad at them. You cannot be angry or bitter towards them. And so his argument with writing entirely, actually, and art in general, is if we can get people to see other people just like they see themselves, the world will be a better place. You'll be less angry with others. you'll be more understanding, and etc. And so his point is that he writes this whole experience from Natasha's perspective. And so you see the heartbreak of Natasha feeling like Andrei is not coming back. Where is he? And then this charming man comes along and begins wooing her, and you see the inner turmoil for days and days and weeks until finally Anatole comes and says, just come, be with me. And so they plan it and they schedule it. And then in one moment, it seems, Natasha's life completely falls apart. Everyone hates her and thinks that she's just a horrible person for wanting to run away and betraying Andrei like that. And what is Andrei going to think when he gets back? And, oh, the shame that she brought her family. And so she's just absolutely devastated. But what Tolstoy brings you through is that rather than joining everyone else in judging this woman, you feel sympathy for her. You feel sympathy for her. You don't abandon her. You understand her. And so you also are able to feel pity and to want to comfort her and say, yeah, that was kind of dumb, but it's okay. You know, I could have made that same mistake. Anyone could have made that same mistake. And we still love you and can accept you. So a little offshoot there. When Andrei comes back, he does find that Natasha indeed was planning on eloping with Anatole and was not faithful. And what he does is resort to the emotional asceticism and indifferent spirit that he had before he had ever fallen in love. He returns all of the letters and the portraits and just acts as if nothing ever happened. He doesn't weep. He doesn't mourn. He doesn't even see Natasha. He just shuts off. It seems as though he had been right all along. Love is a lie. You can't attain happiness so easy. Why would he ever think that you could? And why would you even take the chance if you can get burned so easily? Well, after a few weeks of just trying to separate himself from his emotions, he finally rejoins the army after Napoleon's forces are continually devastating the Russian countryside and getting farther and farther into their homeland. He's just a man who's bitter. Every day he becomes more and more like his father, with just an emotional detachment and overall cruelty. And the way Tolstoy writes it is just so brilliant. You can see the way Andrei does these little things that are just like his dad, and it makes you see, he's becoming the very thing that he's been admiring. And the more and more he's damaged by the world, the more and more cruel he gets, and the more he admires his father's lifestyle. But for our purposes, I'm just going to skip ahead to later when Andrei rejoins the army at the personal request of General Kutuzov. And it's just because the Russians have completely been devastated in the war. They have been pushed back almost to Moscow. Nearly all is lost. And in this battle, where Andrei has a small regiment and he's commanding forces, once again, not once again, last time it was a club. This time it's a cannon. Cannon shrapnel hits Andrei and he's blown back and he's wounded very badly, and his wounds get worse and worse, and he ends up being hospitalized and in serious condition over the next several days. And the Russian army is just continually retreating, and they engage at Borodino, and again they retreat, and finally Napoleon himself sacks Moscow, which has been completely abandoned by the inhabitants. And the Rostovs, Natasha, Nikolai, live in the city, live in Moscow. And so as they're all retreating, word gets around that Andrei is wounded, badly wounded. And so Natasha finds him and starts taking care of him. And Andrei is just in delirium, in and out of vivid dreaming and wakefulness. And Andrei's sister Maria brings his son, and they share some touching moments. And while Andrei sincerely believes that he has a coin-toss chance of living, he once again is confronted by this infinitely great thing that he cannot touch. He feels as though he's lived his entire life wrongly here on what he thinks to be, very well could be, his deathbed. And he becomes convinced that love is the one thing that binds the universe together, and that the only way to see as clearly as he does is by giving up life entirely. and then Prince Andrei dies. So here's the question that I think Andrei's story arc really asks. Do you want to live life with the reasonable fear and the reasonable bitterness and beautyless stoicism that Andrei lives life with? I mean, Andrei's answer to the pain and suffering and meaninglessness of life is that, well, you protect yourself. You don't let things get too close. There's no beauty to go out there and find. There's no value in positive, subjective experiences. There's just you and your reason. Because really, what else are you going to do if your temperament and intellect prohibit sincere religious belief, and your father is cruel, and you're unhappy with your marriage, and then you get nearly killed in battle? Andrei has no prospects, no joy, no life. He's angry and lonely, and finally one day he crawls out of his hole and falls in love. He makes a questionable decision that he thought was reasonable, and he comes back to discover that his betrothed has been unfaithful. But his pride won't let him forgive her, and he can't even really express his emotions that well at all. And as his pain drives him closer and closer to the perfect image of his father, whom he respects but also pities, he realizes that even his homeland has been obliterated in a way that there's no recovering from. And on his deathbed, when he can barely communicate with anybody, fate joins him once again to Natasha Rostov, and he's able to find peace and forgiveness and love. And what he learns is, or I should put it this way, the conclusion that he comes to is, love is the only thing that really matters. Love is the undefinable great thing that's out there that I was missing, and I felt the lack of the first time that I was struck by a baseball bat and laying and bleeding out. And it was the thing that I realized was missing, that the song, and not the lyrics, that the actual song spoke of it. It's so grand and beautiful, and it's out there. And it made me want to weep, made me happy, but also sad. It's deep. And now here he is on his deathbed, able to share a moment of mutual love and forgiveness. Andrei realizes that this eternal, transcendent wall that separates the everyday, mundane from the exquisite beauty of life is love. Love for other human beings, love for music, love for food, grass, the sky. And at this point, he sees death as an escape from his stoic, beautyless, painful existence. And eventually, he does die at peace, leaving behind a distraught ex-girlfriend, a sister, and a son. Well, I hope that Andrei's story has been an interesting one. I know I have certainly enjoyed it. And thank you for listening, and I hope that you'll join me next time on the Well-Read Christian Podcast.